Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Severe Weather Seasonal Outlook Get Ready Queensland webinar. For those joining us for the first time, welcome. And for anyone who has joined us for our webinars before, welcome back. Today, our experts will be giving you an in-depth look at temperature, rainfall, and other conditions you can expect in the coming months and how you can get ready for it. My name is Jordan, and I'll be your moderator today. I'm joined by Claire, who will be producing today's webinar. Together, we'll help to make the webinar as interactive as possible. Before we start, may I ask for your attention as we cover off some housekeeping items. So with the current situation as it is in Australia, this webinar will be conducted from our respective homes. Please bear this in mind as we may encounter some technical issues during the broadcast. As Claire mentioned in the warm-up, we do have 2 people in Melbourne, 2 people in Brisbane, and 1 in Cairns, so we're all spread over the place today. Our broadcast will run for 60 minutes with plenty of time allocated for questions. This webinar is also being recorded and the video will be shared with you via email. For first-time attendees, please see some helpful tips on your screen. Most importantly, please note the chat box where you can send through any questions or feedback for the presenters. Please use this and not the Q&A box to send us your questions during the session, and we will try and answer as many as possible during the allocated breaks. It is the speech bubble button on the right hand of your screen. The text will turn from black to blue once it's on. If you'd like to test out the chat box now, feel free to tell us your name and where you're dialing in from. And finally, I'm delighted to introduce you to our presenters. From the Bureau, we have Laura Burkell and Jess Carey. And joining us from QRA is Melissa Dixon. Welcome, team. Laura is a meteorologist who leads the Queensland forecasting team in Brisbane. After spending the last 5 years working in Darwin, Laura has special interests in tropical cyclones and monsoonal weather. Jess has worked as a flood forecaster in Queensland for more than 12 years during some of the state's most significant flood events. Over this time, he has developed an expert knowledge of flood behaviour across Queensland. And Melissa is a community and stakeholder engagement practitioner with 15 years experience working on key local and state government projects and programs. She's worked on a range of disaster resilient projects for the QRA, including the Brisbane River Catchment Flood Studies and regional resilience strategies as part of the Resilient Queensland program. So you've got the best of the best here today. We do have a packed hour for you, and it's going to include a severe weather outlook for 2020 and 21, and also some information from Get Ready Queensland. Let's not keep you waiting any longer and get straight to Laura. Now, I do see that we have got quite a few people on today, so we do only have a finite amount of time to ask questions, so it's best to start getting them in now. If you have a question that you want these guys to answer, put it in the chat box and send it through. Laura's going to start us off with an overview of the upcoming months, and like I said, don't forget you can send those questions to us at any time. All yours, Lara. Sorry, I meant Laura. I'm sorry about that, Laura.
That's all good, Jordan. Thank you very much. All right, well, I guess we'll start with La Nina, because if anyone's had a weather conversation lately, I'm sure that La Nina has come up, and that is because the Bureau declared a La Nina earlier in September. And what that means for Queensland is that we're going to see a lot more rainfall, or more rainfall than average, as well as widespread flooding potentially from that increased amount of rainfall. And the other thing that La Nina typically brings for Queenslanders is a higher amount of tropical cyclones than we would usually see in a typical season. So the next slide will show us just exactly the influence that La Nina has on Australia, and I'll just talk to Queensland, even though we've got the Australian maps up there, so you can see a much bigger picture of how it affects the entire country. But you can see there that the rainfall is really the thing that does change for Queensland during a La Nina season. And while last season Queenslanders, the severe weather outlook, Queenslanders saw a real focus on the fire weather, and that's really shifted this year. So the fire season has not been as big, but our focus is more on the La Nina and the impacts that could bring. So if the impacts include a higher than average rainfall, then we're also going to be expecting a little bit more flooding than we would usually see in a severe weather season. So a real shift of that focus away from fire conditions and into rainfall and flooding, which Jess will talk about in a few slides' time. It's also worth noting that in a typical La Nina, the maximum temperatures are a little bit cooler than average, and that's just because if we're expecting more rainfall, there'll be more days that are cloudy and the maximum temperatures on average will be slightly less. So when we do talk about La Nina in Queensland, a lot of people go back a decade to 2010 to 11 when we saw our last significant La Nina event, and that's because a lot of the state was really heavily impacted by floods, and that's also when we saw tropical cyclones Yasi in the northern areas of Queensland. So it's quite natural to draw comparisons, but it's very, you keep in mind too that what we saw in 2010 was a very strong La Nina. So what we're looking at this year is a little bit weaker, but that doesn't mean that we can't draw some comparisons. So we have a pretty good idea that La Nina typically does bring more rainfall than average, but we're definitely not going to say that we will, there's a guarantee we'll see what we saw in 2010, because it is a much different season, much different La Nina, sorry. And two, we were heading into that La Nina in 2010 with really saturated catchments and different dam levels. So the situation is a little bit different this year. So again, this is the maps of 2011 and 2012. So you can see that a lot of parts, especially along the east coast of Queensland and even pushing into the Central Highlands, Central West, they saw their highest rainfall on average. So it really was a really significant year and a very strong La Nina. So I'll hand over now to Jess, and he's going to talk us through the other major climate driver. So La Nina looks at the Pacific Ocean, and the other climate driver comes out of the Indian Ocean. So over to you, Jess.
Thanks, Laura. Good evening, everyone. So as Laura mentioned, we've had a look at the Pacific Ocean, which obviously for Queensland is our main major contributor, given we're on the coast of Australia, of course. But it's also important to note that the Indian Ocean dipole, or the sea surface temperatures, or the climate driver in to the west of us, also has some impacts over our weather as well. And as you can see there, we've got quite warm water off the coast of Australia, of recent times, the temperature patterns of that ocean has sort of varied between neutral and negative IOD, which is obviously negative IOD is pushing towards that sort of wetter outlook for Australia, as it says on the slide there, the current pattern is really consistent with a neutral IOD, but some models are suggesting that we may push into that negative IOD. So it's important to remember that whilst we're expecting that ENSO, or the La Nina that's building in the Pacific Ocean, is probably going to drive most of our climate, certainly the IOD is going to play some role, but certainly this year probably a less of a role than what it did last year, when we were getting those hot, dry westerly winds, driving really significant fire conditions through Australia. So certainly the Indian Ocean dipole is significant and worth keeping in mind, but probably the Pacific Ocean is going to be the one that we're keeping our closest eye on for this year. Next slide, please, Laura. So this is the equivalent slide to what Laura for La Nina. As you can see there, these are the types of impacts that we would see if we move into a negative phase of the IOD, and I suppose the take-home message there is probably not as significant impact as what we were seeing with that La Nina, but certainly you can see there the rainfall, particularly in the tropical north of Queensland, really is edging towards above average rainfall, from those influences of the negative IOD. So remember what we just said, that most models are going for neutral IOD. However, there is some chance, and some models are predicting that we might move into that negative IOD. So this certainly will be driving some of the rainfall, and you can also see the maximum temperatures there to be slightly cooler as a result of a negative IOD. And going back to Laura's message earlier, that's driven really by more cloud, which obviously suppresses the temperature during the daytime. Wetter and cooler days, and potentially some warmer nights, particularly in the north, just given that that cloud activity that sort of tucks the heat in, that builds up throughout the day. Next slide, please. So now we've broadly given you a picture of what's going on both sides of the Australian mainland. What's our outlook? We've been through the ENSO. We've suggested that La Nina is well underway in the tropical Pacific Ocean. You can see that large tongue of cooler water extending out from South America, which pushes warmer water off our coast, which obviously assists in building cloud and obviously rainfall for Australia. And we've also got warmer water off the Indian Ocean. So we've really got some quite significant warm water off northern Australia, and that's really where our forecast is heading over the next 3 to 6 months, as we move into our typical wet season in Queensland. So that's our climate outlook for rainfall and temperature. We might just go to the next slide too, please, Laura. So we've been through the drivers. What is our actual forecast now? So these three images here, maps of Australia, are giving you a picture of what we're expecting for November 2020. So you can see there on that left-hand side map, we're certainly expecting the maximum temperature, or the daytime temperature, to broadly be below average for large parts of the southern half of Queensland, and that's going to be driven broadly by excessive amounts of cloud from all of that that wet weather that we're expecting. Then we move into the middle map of Australia, and we're expecting broadly some warmer than average nights, just as a result of that that extra cloud that we're expecting to be around. The third map of Australia gives you your outlook for November for rainfall. And as you can see, seeing as we've got that warm water off Australia, large parts of Australia, including Queensland, are really looking at above average rainfall for the month of November. Next slide, please, Laura.
Just before you start on that, we do have an opportunity for you guys to ask some questions very soon. I know we just went through the IOD stuff, and a lot of people love to ask questions about the climate drivers. So if you do have a question about that, now's the time to get it in. You can just hit the chat button down on the bottom right-hand screen and put it in. We've got a lot of people dialing in from all over the place today, including someone from hotel quarantine, which I wasn't expecting. So if you got some time to kill, send us some questions in now. Take it away.
Thanks, Jordan. So I've just went through the outlook for November. So that gives you, I suppose, the short-term outlook. But what are we expecting for the 3 months, November, December to January? And broadly, it's a very similar story. Maximum temperatures, daytime temperatures below average through much of Queensland. Overnight temperatures warmer than average, given we've got that cloud, and as you can see there, an even wetter picture over that November to January period, just resulting from all of that convection from those warm waters off Australia, driving all that rainfall, and really wetting us up for potentially typically in Queensland, February and March are our two wettest months statistically. So what we're really expecting over these next 3 months is for those catchments to really become saturated, and then when our typical wet season kicks in, really starting to have that rainfall fall on wet catchments. Next slide, please, Laura. So now we've been through the climate drivers. So we've given you an understanding of what we're measuring, what we're seeing on the ground, and how we think that might play out from a climate point of view. Now we want to get into some more specifics and talk about specific hazards. So what we'll go through now over the next series of slides will specific slides, describing specific hazards, that we might see, in a typical severe weather season. Next slide, please, Laura. So for those of you dialed in from the tropical north, I suppose the really important thing that everyone's keen to know about is when is the wet going to start? When is that northern rainfall onset expected to begin? And as we saw, with negative events and also La Nina events, this time of the year we are expecting that those first rains to come earlier and certainly to be more prevalent, more widespread. As you can see there, our forecast for the onset of the wet season, of the northern rainfall onset, is expected to be earlier than normal. That should probably come as no surprise. And certainly parts of the far west in the Channel Country have already seen some pretty significant weather. And I think it was only a week or two ago where Darwin had, I think its wettest October day on record. So whilst there might be some quite dry places around Queensland, and certainly my house is looking a bit brown, we are expecting that that shift to start soon, and there have already been some places in Western Queensland. I mentioned Darwin, and also I suppose Southern Australia has been in flood over the last couple of weeks as well. So it is happening, and it's a slow developing process, but certainly over the next few months we are expecting that to start up, and certainly the beginning of the northern rainfall onset we're expecting to be a little bit earlier than usual. Next slide, please. So I've probably broadly covered this already, but just to specifically mention it, I was saying before, the rainfall we're expecting over the next 3 months is certainly going to be above average. That's certainly what we're expecting. That's what all of the climate models are suggesting. Thankfully, though, there are some quite dry catchments, particularly in on the eastern seaboard of Queensland. You can see there that map of Australia on the left. There is a nice a pink blob, I suppose, inland of sort of Mackay, Rockhampton area. That's suggesting that soil moisture conditions in that area is sort of below average. So there's actually some quite dry catchments, along the eastern seaboard, and that's really offset by some actually quite wet catchments in Western Queensland, where we've already had some flooding. So some areas are wet, some areas are drier. But as we get that significant rainfall over the next 3 months, we would be expecting that soil moisture conditions to really wet up. There may certainly be some flooding resulting from that rainfall as well. But what this is going to leave us with is likely to have quite saturated wet catchments as we move into our typical wetter months of the year, which is February and March. So that's when the bulk of most of our usually falls, and unlike last year, that rainfall is actually going to be falling on quite saturated catchments. So I suppose that's the picture for from a flooding point of view, that whilst there might be some buffer in some areas, we are expecting those catchments across most of Queensland to be wetted up over the next 3 months, ready and primed to go for February, March, April next year, which is when usually we get most of our cyclones and certainly most of our rainfall as well. Over to you, Laura. Thank you.
Thanks, Jess. Okay, so I'm going to move into talking about bushfires now. So on the screen, we have our bushfire outlook for September to November. So as I mentioned earlier, we have seen a very different bushfire season than what we saw last year, but we still have been issuing some fire weather warnings, and the season isn't over yet. So it still goes into October and November. So those in drier parts, we're still encouraging to definitely stay alert and stay across our warnings on our website. And this map here shows the areas where we're looking to see above normal fire potential. So fire weather conditions come across from 6 different factors, and 3 of those factors are the day-to-day weather. So how hot is it? How dry is it? Is it windy? If it's hot, dry and windy, we're going to see an increase in the fire danger. And then the other 3 factors are more to do with sort of longer term things, less day-to-day things. So that's fuel load, and that's what's increased this fire potential in this map. So fuel load is essentially what fuel is there to burn, and there are some areas in Queensland that still have places like fuel to burn. So that's why we're seeing an above normal fire potential in those areas. And the other two factors are a drought factor and curing. And curing is simply, is that fuel load dried out? So if we have areas where there's more fuel, hasn't had much rain recently and had time to dry out, that's where we're going to see that increased fire potential. So moving on now to severe storms. So first I'd like to just talk through what is a severe storm. So if people take one message home today, I would love for it to be that not every storm is severe, and the Bureau only warns for the severe storms that are going to have those kind of more major impacts on people. So severe storms, we classify them if they've got hail that's greater than 2 centimetres, if they have wind gusts that can cause damage, so that's greater than 90 kilometres per hour, or if they can cause flash flooding. Also, we have this special type of severe storms called tornadoes. So tornadoes sometimes get a bit confusing, but essentially a tornado is just a severe storm that can produce hail, wind, and flash flooding. And a note too on flash flooding, when we issue a storm warning for flash flooding, that means that we like to call it top-down. That's a top-down flood. So it means that it's rained so heavily in a very short period of time that flash flooding has happened. So that's very rapid flooding, and that's when we issue a storm warning. However, the flooding that Jess was just talking about, that's what we call riverine flooding. So that's bottom-up flooding. So when we see quite a bit of rain, but over a longer period, the catchments get saturated, then they get full, and we see that type of flooding. That's when we issue flood watches and flood warnings. So there's just a little bit of a difference there that's worth noting. So back to severe storms, you can see in the graph on the left that Brisbane City does trump all the other capital cities in Australia for the most amount of severe storms. So our location and where we are and the climate we have is prime for severe storms, and we do see quite a lot of them. We haven't seen too many this season, so storm season sort of started kind of end of September into October. So we haven't seen too many yet, but it is still the transition of the storm season. So as we head further into sort of November, December, and in the new year, that's when we'll start to see a lot more storms, and that's when it's a good idea to keep an eye out on the app or the website for the storm warnings that we're issuing. So when we are in La Nina, we do see a few more severe storms. That is more a factor of, there's 3 ingredients that make a storm happen, and one of them is moisture. So if we're in a La Nina, we're seeing more rainfall, we're seeing more moisture, typically we're going to see a few more storms. So moving on now to tropical cyclones. So the Bureau did release its tropical cyclone outlook on the 12th of October, so a couple of days ago. And what we do see in La Nina is typically more than average. So what is average? For the whole Australia region, it is 11 tropical cyclones in a season. The season starts 1st of November, ends end of April. And for Queensland specifically, we see around 4 tropical cyclones in the Coral Sea, with 1 to 2 of them crossing the east coast. And then every season, we always see a couple in the Gulf as well. But they can be notoriously erratic. So sometimes they cross on our side of the border, and then sometimes they cross over into the Northern Territory. So this slide here sort of shows us what we can expect in terms of tropical cyclones when we are in a La Nina. So it's quite important to point out here that La Nina is a trend. Like, it gives us an idea of what to expect, but it's not prescriptive. So there have been La Nina years, as you can see, they're in blue on this graph, where we didn't see the average number of cyclones. We saw close to or we saw under, but typically when we do have La Nina, we see more. So I like to sort of draw the analogy that if you were to place a bet on how many tropical cyclones, odds are we'll see more than typical season, but that doesn't mean that we might see average or even less. And it is important to note too, for those that are starting to get ready in the north with their tropical cyclone, you do the preparedness stuff. So packing away all that clutter and cleaning out the leaves and things like that. It really doesn't matter, I guess, what the cyclone outlook is. If you're preparing, it just takes one tropical cyclone to cross near you and you'll really see the impacts of that. So tropical cyclone names. If we do see a tropical cyclone in Queensland and it gets named and it's the first one of the season, it will be called Imogen. And then we go down the list, so Joshua, Kimmy, Lucas, and so on. And you can see there that we do alternate between the male and the female names, and it does go in alphabetical order too. So we go down through the alphabet. And a bit of tropical cyclone name trivia for you. If you do want a name on that list, there's a very traditional way to get it on there, and you have to write a letter to the Bureau of Meteorology. But that's been such a popular process that we actually have enough cyclone names to last us for almost a decade, I think. So you can still do that, but you probably won't see your name there for a little while. So here is a summary of what we've just gone through. So looking at things that are quite similar, more likely or less likely to happen this year for Australia. And now I'm just going to hand over to Jess one more time so he can talk you through some website resources. So over to you, Jess.
Thanks, Laura. Don't mind going to the next slide, I think. Sorry, so I'll just get started while Laura's just going to the next slide. So yes, thanks, Laura. So we've got a relatively new part of our website that some of you may be aware or may not. But you can see the URL at the top there, bom.gov.au/knowyourweather, and inside that you'll see that sort of image on the left there. And there's lots of useful information that you can get in there just to understand the risks and those hazards that we've just been going through and we've been talking about. So you can see there's a really a video that's been filmed that helps the general public understand what floods are, and there's equivalent videos that have been done for thunderstorms, heat waves, bushfire, drought, tropical cyclones. So I would strongly encourage everyone to get on there and have a look at that resource. It's certainly very useful. And as we've just been through those floods and thunderstorms and tropical cyclones are certainly looking likely. They're going to be more prevalent this year. Certainly get on the website, have a look at those resources. Get up to speed on what these hazards are. So if and when they may impact you, you've got a better understanding and a better awareness of, and hopefully a little bit more resilience as well. Thanks, Laura. Next slide.
Great, I'll take it from here. Thank you so much, guys. I hope that gives you a really good explainer of what you can expect in the coming months. And those websites are really great resources, so make sure you jot them down. If you don't get them off the top of your head, then don't worry. We will be sending out the presentation material with the email. So anyone who attended can look through these slides a little bit later on at your own pace. We do now have a great opportunity for you to ask questions of our experts, so please start sending them in via the chat function. It's that little speech bubble button bar at the right-hand side of your taskbar. Send them through. We'd love to hear from you. I actually have a question. Where is that list of cyclone names located? Because if you're about to have a kid, and I know someone who's about to have a kid, I want to make sure that the name that they're thinking of is not on that list.
Yeah, I can take that one, Jordan. Yeah, we did just have Hurricane Laura in America actually a few months ago. So definitely a few jokes hurtled my way after that one. I can understand why. So if you head to our website and there's a search function and you can just type in tropical cyclones, there's a whole range of really good resources and quite a few that are educational or some that are a bit more fun, like the cyclone names. And it's all there. It's all there on our website, and there's a whole list, and I think it goes through the alphabet twice. So it's quite a lot of names for the next few years if you want to check something off the list.
All right, well, staying with that, Michael has asked, what happened to the tropical name starting with U?
Oh, I'm not sure. Is in there isn't one on the list, perhaps?
I
know
believe so, yeah.
Okay, I think if we don't have any, and I'm guessing you might be a bit of an unpopular, well, not unpopular, but just kind of rare name starting with you, perhaps that we've skipped over that one. I know sometimes we've done that before. So yeah, if anyone has a good U name, might be a good opportunity to write into the Bureau and get it requested.
Then you could jump the queue, so get it in now.
Hey, just jump in too. Just a bit of interesting trivia because we're located in Queensland. It's possible too that cyclone names can actually be named by Fiji. And if you do cast your mind back to 2011, we had tropical cyclone Yasi, and I think Alui was another one, and there may be many more. But that's sometimes if the cyclone is of cyclone strength and significance in the Fiji area of operations, they may be in a position to name the system, and then when it moves into the Australian or the Queensland area of operations, we just take the name from there and we run with it. So that would be, I suppose, a caveat that if it's the meteorology naming the system, that obviously will be using those cyclone names, but there is some examples of where we've sort of inherited a system and therefore we've inherited the name as well.
Okay. There's also some people saying UEC was one that came through, and Jay Shipton, who I don't know if he remembers me, but we used to work together, work in the same network. He said, I live in Mackay, and we had a cyclone Ulili, I don't know if I've said that right at all, ULUI, a few years back. Is that something you guys remember?
Yeah, I think that's a Louis. Yep, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's how we pronounce it, I think.
Okay, thank you for saving me on that one. Plenty of time to get your questions and comments in. We're going to get to one now from Michelle. She said, I understand it's going to be a big wet season. What is the worst case scenario for the southeast? Is there potential heightened risk for regular flooding and coastal crossings?
Do you want to take the flooding part of that? Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly for southeast, just going back a few. Certainly the catchments in and around the southeast of the state are certainly quite at the moment, so that does give us a bit of a buffer, but obviously we're expecting quite a wet 3 months. But if we do cast our minds back to 2010, we had very, very wet catchments already at this time of the year. So I just remind everyone, we certainly wouldn't be ruling anything out at this point. But the climate is slightly different to what we had in 2010-11. We've certainly got much drier catchments than what we had in 2010-11. But in saying that, is possible, and we know this is Queensland. It's probably the flooding capital of Australia, unfortunately, and it happens somewhere in Queensland every year. So this is certainly our message today. From a flooding point of view, is we are expecting wetter than average conditions, and widespread flooding is certainly a larger risk, more so than what we were looking at this time last year. So wouldn't want to rule anything out, but it's important to make that distinction that we do have a different climate and different catchment conditions to what we had at this time in 2010 as we headed into 2011. So it's important to everyone to note, to note that down, but we certainly wouldn't be ruling anything out.
Okay. Michael has asked, could the La Nina, and I think this is a really interesting point, still develop and grow strength from here as we move into the wet season? So assuming, at what point during the wet season, like what month, can we say we are past the point of it growing any further?
Wow, that's a great question.
I thought so too.
I'll take a stab at it. I know that typically our models don't go out too far, so we do have a bit of certainty from now until the end of the year that we'll stay in that La Nina. And in terms of growing, I guess that means that can the waters keep cooling, that cooling pattern that causes the La Nina out in the Pacific Ocean. And I would say, unless you want to jump in and correct me, Jess, but yes, we could still see the cooling of that, and that signal could go a bit stronger. And in terms of, the forecast for that when we're out of it, that unfortunately is a bit too long term for most of our models. So we have most of the certainty from now until the end of the year and sort of start of next year, but beyond that, not too sure. And I was hoping, Jordan, I could just jump back to the previous question because we didn't answer the coastal crossing for South Queensland. So,
Oh, yeah, sorry, I jumped in too quick. I was too eager. Please take it away.
no, that's okay.
Do you need me to repeat the question in case you forgot? We did ask whether there is going to be a potential heightened risk for regular flooding and coastal crossings, in the southeast because of the big wet season we're having.
Thank you. So in terms of the coastal crossing, I guess La Nina definitely does increase that likelihood of tropical cyclones. And if there's more than average around, then there is more likely to be some more crossings than we typically see, which is 1 to 2 in Queensland. But also to note that if we're looking at southern Queensland, we do need the waters to be 26.5 degrees for a tropical cyclone to develop and to grow. So in terms of southern Queensland, probably not so much. It's when we get those warmer waters and those tropical waters.
All right, I'm going to go with this question as well because I think we are talking about La Nina and what it's doing. How long can the La Nina conditions hang around for? So could it be, what month next year, or are we looking at a shorter one and be over before Christmas? What are we expecting?
Yeah, that's another good question. They can last quite a while. So there are variations in the climate that can sort of look at a monthly or a yearly scale. So like I said, we don't have too much certainty beyond this year because our climate models, the further you go out, the harder it is to model things. But we could definitely see them on much bigger scales than just a couple of months.
It's great that you mentioned the model because Sue has asked, how often are the models updated?
Oh, that's a great climate question. That's maybe one for climatologists. I'm not sure if you want to jump in there, Jess, if you know.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether it's how often are the climate models calibrated. That's certainly a question for one of our climatologist friends. If you mean when are our forecast updated, so I think we've got updates on our website every 2 weeks now. So if that was the angle of the question, how often do we update our forecast? Every sort of 2 weeks. But if it's a calibration question on how frequently do we update our models based on the latest information, we might need to take that one on notice, and we can get you an answer from one of our climatologists friends.
Okay. If you are interested in more information about climate drivers, you can also subscribe to our Climate Driver Update, which you just mentioned. It comes out fortnightly and it gives you all the La Nina updates you'll need, and we'll put a link in our chat in just a second. Moving on, Nathan did ask, and I believe we talked about this. He wanted to know, when will we get rain? And you did say about the onset when it was coming. If someone is in an area, and because we have answered this, is there a way that they can find somewhere on our website that will give us a little bit more accurate prediction of when they're going to get rain?
I can jump in to answer this one. So if they wanted to have a look at longer term, that would be the climate area. So on our homepage, if you scroll down, there's a link to more climate resources. And climate looks at things on a fortnightly, monthly, and then 3-monthly scale. But if you do want very sort of prescriptive, it's probably going to rain this amount on this day, our forecasts are what you're looking for. So you can get them again on our website or the app, and that will give you the next 7 days. So that's a lot more shorter term and a lot more sort of certainty and a bit more information, whereas the climate's longer term and that's more of a trend.
Okay, well, thank you guys. We're going to give you a little bit of a rest now. There is still plenty of time to ask questions to both the guys from the Bureau and our next guest. She is Melissa, and she's from the QRA. She's going to be telling us about how you can get ready for these conditions that we've just spoken about. Mel, welcome, and please take us through.
Great. Thank you so much, Jordan. I'm really loving this conversation. It's so interesting. I think I'll be looking for to see if there's been a Cyclone Melissa after this on your website. So jokes aside, I'm Melissa Dixon. I'm from the Get Ready Queensland program, and it's great to be here today. It is Get Ready Week. It's that time of year when we really encourage all Queenslanders to have a think about what they need to do to prepare. So it's really great to be able to be here following this conversation about the weather outlook for this season, knowing that it's going to be wetter than average. Really, we need to prepare quite differently to last year, which was quite dry. And so I just want to talk you through a little bit about what you can do and talk to friends and family about this year. Just to the next slide, it's no secret that Queensland is the most disaster impacted state in Australia. And in the past 10 years, Queensland has experienced more than 80 significant disaster events, whether it be flood, cyclone, storm tide, severe storm, and bushfire. What we're noticing though when we talk to the community about their disaster risk is that many still feel that they have a low level of risk and really aren't prioritising their preparedness. And what we're saying here at Get Ready Queensland is that disasters can happen anywhere and at any time, and Queensland has a track record. As you can see, 80 significant disasters in the last 10 years. So particularly with severe storm, that can happen anywhere at any time with limited warning. And so we just want to make sure that people don't get caught out this season. So just on to the next slide. Being Get Ready Week, the whole purpose of that is to really talk to the community about what they can do. And by joining on the line, you will already have an interest in this. So I really ask you this week just to reach out to the people in your life who maybe need a bit of encouragement to start thinking about preparedness. It isn't always the most exciting thing to do, prepare, but it's really important and it really does make a difference. So this year we're asking people to spend a few hours this week to take just a few steps, 3 steps to get ready. And really it's just about giving you peace of mind that you and those in your household and those who are vulnerable in your life are having the conversations and know what to do should a disaster strike. Just to the next slide. So we have 3 steps that we are talking to the community about this year. Step 1 is to have a household emergency plan. And we're becoming increasingly dependent on mobile technology and computers. And so we need to ask ourselves what happens when we don't have access to those things. We need a plan that's written down, that's saved somewhere, perhaps in multiple places, that we can access in an emergency. It's about documenting the phone numbers of those important people, your neighbours, your family members, your doctor, your local council, could even be your vet, people who might be vulnerable in your life that you need to reach out to. A really important thing to go into that plan is having a chat with those in your household about where would you meet each other in an emergency. So if you couldn't reach each other for some particular reason, where would you meet? And I think that's particularly important for families with young children, just to have those conversations so that if you can't contact them in an emergency, they've got some confidence that there is a plan. And really important one is, where would you go if you needed to evacuate your home for a few days? This is really important. I know that there are evacuation centres all across the state in a disaster, but really they're meant to be a last resort. We really hope that people can have conversations if they can stay with somebody during a disaster if they're unable to stay within their own home. And as I said before, think about the vulnerable people in your life. Is there someone that you can reach out to? Do you have elderly neighbours? Are there family members or families with young children in your life? Friends living alone or people with health issues? This season, with the weather that's coming, we need to help those people along as well. So if you're in a position to help others, I really encourage you to. To the next slide, where we talk about the second step, which is packing supplies. I won't spend too long on this. I think most people know what needs to go into an emergency kit. It's just taking the time to do it. So I think, you know, if you can set yourself a task this weekend, most people would have things around the house already, and it's just a matter of setting it aside so that it's ready to go. So really, your supplies are there, making sure you've got batteries, you've got torches, you've got non-perishable food that's, you know, not out of date, you know. Having a battery operated radio is so important now. As I said, our reliance on technology, we need to make sure we've got a backup. And having important documents, we can't stress enough. If something happened in your home and you lost access to important documents, what impact would that have on you following that disaster? So make sure you've got copies of documents like your birth certificate, like your insurance policy, anything that you think you might need following a disaster, really important. And to the next slide, who could forget our pets? You know, some of the most vulnerable creatures in our lives, our beautiful pets that we care for. And it's no laughing matter that sometimes people resist evacuating because they're scared to leave their pets behind, because they have nowhere for their pets to go. We don't want that to be a reason for you not to evacuate if you need to this disaster season. So please have a think about, is there a place you could take your pets in a disaster? We know that not all evacuation centres allow pets, so please be mindful of that. And last but not least is about checking your insurance. So what's surprising when we talk to people about preparedness activities, many people don't associate checking their insurance with getting ready for disasters. It's a really important part of your preparedness. Just ask anyone who's been through a disaster and had issues with not having enough cover. So that is the number one risk, is that you don't have enough sufficient cover to rebuild after a disaster. On the Get Ready website, and you can see the link on the screen there, but there's a link from our landing page. We'll provide you with some prompts that you can talk to your insurance companies, and we just recommend shop around and really get the cover that you deserve. So I think I've used all my time. Is that right, Jordan? And I'll hand back to you guys. This last slide was just about preparing your home, and I think most people know what to do. It really is just a reminder that now is the time to do it, particularly with the wet weather being forecast to start very soon. I think this weekend is the perfect time for you to get out in the garden and start, cleaning up and getting things ready. Back to you, Jordan.
Thank you, Mel. We always have time for you. Did you want to go through some of these last slides?
Oh, look, I think this one about alerts and warnings are really important, and so we've got links to all of the alerts that you can access on the Get Ready website as a bit of a cheat link. But one thing I wanted to mention was on the next slide in regards to travel. COVID has thrown so many curveballs at us this year. What we think is likely to happen and that we're concerned about, of course, is that increased travel on roads within the state, because people are used to holidaying in different ways, but we think people will hit the road this summer. Now, when there's lots of wet weather and things like that, and you're travelling in unfamiliar territories, that's when you really have to find out before you travel what the risk is, understand the location that you're visiting, and have a car emergency kit. I can't stress it enough. Really look after yourselves and your family. Do your research. Every local council has information available about local risks. Talk to the locals in the area. when you're visiting, you are a visitor and you're not expected to be familiar, but we do need you to be prepared and aware. So, that's my advice for this year. If you're like me this summer and you're going to hit the road and do a bit of camping, do your research first and have an emergency kit in the car ready to go.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Mel. That was great. And we'll finish up on a picture of everyone's favourite Jonathan Taylor.
Yeah, Jonathan Thurston.
Oh my God, I can't believe I said Taylor.
and people might see that on the TV screens. We've got the advertising campaign running now, so you might see that on the telly.
So I was looking at some other names at the same time. I definitely know his name's Thurston. I've got to admit, I'm not the biggest NRL fan, but I did grow up in the heartland in Sydney, so I should know that. Thank you for that, Mel. I thought that was excellent.
Thanks.
So if you've, we do still have time for you to get some questions in. So remember, hit that little speech bubble bar and let us know what questions you have for us. We'd love to hear anything that you've got. This is our last Q&A session, so it's your chance to get your question asked. Katarina has asked, if this year is weaker, has a weaker La Nina than 2010 and 1974, is it still possible we will have a much stronger La Nina in the following season? I will invite the guys from the Bomb to come back to answer that question, and we might throw it to Laura to take care of that one.
Cool. Thanks, Jordan. So will this La Nina influence the next one? I think that's the question asked. And the answer is, we could definitely see a stronger La Nina, or we might not. So we go into these flows of La Nina, neutral conditions, El Nino. That is the pattern that we can sort of predict. But what is really hard to predict on a longer term scale, so beyond this La Nina, is if we do get another one, how strong could it be? So like the person said in her question, we don't seem to get these really strong ones every time, so they seem to be quite spaced out. So I guess on the law of averages, potentially not seeing a really severe one again. But yeah, that's not something we can predict, unfortunately.
Okay. Before we move on to the next question, thank you to everybody in chat for roasting me on getting Jonathan Thurston's name wrong. Mel, we're going to bring you in. Should someone be worried about going to an evacuation centre with COVID-19 as it is at the moment?
It's such an important question this year, and it's one that we're hearing often. No, they shouldn't. We're asking people this year to take some precautions of their own. So if you've got an emergency kit, you can add hand sanitizer, face masks and tissues to that for your own self. In terms of evacuation centres, the message is really clear that you follow the instructions that are given at the time of an emergency. So we'll ask you to evacuate if necessary, as normal, to evacuation centres. There's no change to that. That's the priority. And the evacuation centres, so local governments have been working really hard this year with the Queensland Government to make sure that we have all the processes and procedures in place in our evacuation centres, so you can feel safe going there. But of course, the Get Ready Queensland message is please do, if you can, find accommodation in advance. So have those conversations and try to use evacuation centres as the last resort if possible.
So can I just would I go to the Get Ready Queensland's website if I wanted to find out where my local evacuation centre is? Or is it
another great question. Yeah. So actually local governments issue the alerts in terms of when evacuation centres are open. And ordinarily, they don't promote any particular evacuation centres outside of a disaster. So it's only during a disaster that local authorities will issue warnings and alerts if you need to evacuate, and they'll promote that evacuation centres are open and where they are. So council websites, you should be following your local government on social media. That's where they issue alerts, and follow ABC Radio, of course. The media as well will pick up that information. But I really encourage you, if you haven't connected with your local council, that is a really important source of local information for you in terms of your risk and messages during a disaster.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Mel. Going to the Bureau guys, Cheyenne, and I hope I've said that correctly, has asked, I might have missed why there might be a risk of severe bushfires in Queensland in November if it's highly likely to be a wetter month. Can we get a little explainer on that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So that bushfire potential risk that we showed in one of the slides is highlighting the areas where there is a little bit more of what we call fuel load. So over the winter months, if we've had, the right conditions for things to regrow, or for, it's the fuel is usually grass or it's that bush. So if that's in the right condition to be potentially dangerous for the fires, then that's when that fire danger potential increases. However, fuel load is just one factor. So the other one, like I said, we call it curing, but it's how much that fuel load has dried out. So absolutely, whoever asked that question has the right idea. If it does start raining and that stuff stops getting dried out, it's not going to be prime for a bushfire, so then the potential will decrease. But at this stage, we haven't really seen that widespread rain, so there are still areas where there is a bushfire potential, and our season does go into November, but once the rain switches on, the bushfire season switches off, and we kind of switch from that bushfire preparedness and right into that rainfall and flooding preparedness.
Okay, let's hope for that. Debbie has asked, what is the intensity of the cyclones that you're expecting? Do we know that?
Oh, that's a good question. Thanks, Debbie. So we don't, unfortunately. So our our tropical cyclone outlook is really good for predicting, roughly how many we might see in a season. It's a climate outlook. So climate's usually very broad. It's on a longer term outlook, and the question that Debbie's asked there is quite specific, and it's short term. So what our outlooks don't tell us is where we'll see the cyclone, what intensity it will bring, what impacts it will bring. So that kind of stuff will come out. We can forecast that sort of within 7 days or less. And yeah, the longer term stuff's really just broadly how many we might be expecting this season.
Okay, Jane wants to know, can we expect a flooding event like Townsville in 2019 with this La Nina in place?
Yeah, I think I can probably take that one. Look, it certainly wouldn't be ruled out. I think we need to remind ourselves that that particular event was extremely rare and quite a high-end event. So I don't think anyone could sort of forecast that sort of an event. But certainly in 2019, the first few months we weren't in the same climactic phase that we are now. So certainly with that forecast for widespread heavy rainfall being more likely, we certainly would be expecting spread flooding to result as well. But whether we can comment on the significance of that flooding is very tricky. But we get major flooding, significant flooding in Queensland every single year somewhere. Unfortunately, in 2019, we had the really significant tragic flooding up through the Gulf country, and of course, most notably in Townsville as well. So there's a heightened risk this year, but the take-home message, I think, really is that's a high-end, rare event, and we wouldn't be expecting that sort of flooding to happen every single year. So it's quite a rare event, but we are in a wetter phase this year, so it's more likely to get flooding up to that level of significance. But that was a rare event in Townsville a couple of years ago.
Okay. We do have a question from Colin, because we did talk about the Indian Ocean Dipole. I reckon you're the best person to ask this, Jess. Keep it short if you can. But why is it called the Indian Ocean Dipole? Can you answer that?
That's another great question. Maybe we didn't have the luxury of having some lovely South American names to use. That's certainly a question probably for our climatologist to answer. It's a little bit more scientific, isn't it? Indian Ocean dipole compared to La Nina or El Nino. But yeah, that's I'm certainly not aware of why it's named that. But it's probably due to the fact that it's a more of a scientific name rather than the I suppose the more marketable names of El Nino and La Nina, but maybe we could take that one on notice and see if we can get an answer. I'm sure there's probably some information on our website as well.
Yeah, maybe we'll start calling it the Colin dipole or something in relation to that great question. We're almost out of time, but Gladys, she'd like to know, are the warnings issued at a neighbourhood scale? And if not, at what scale are warnings usually issued?
Yeah, I can have a go at that for, say, severe weather warnings and thunderstorm, and then I might throw to Jesse so he can cover the flood warnings because they are two separate ones. But that's a great question. So in terms of severe thunderstorm warnings, in the southeast, so around the Brisbane kind of metro area, we do issue shorter term warnings, and they're what we call cell-based. So they contain a lot of information around exactly where the thunderstorm is, where it's going to go, direction, every 10 minutes, this is where it will be. And they're updated, within the hour quite frequently, sometimes within the half hour if we're getting really up-to-date information. So that's the metro area where we have, the highest density population. And then in other areas, we have thunderstorm warnings that we highlight the area where if you are within that area, so if your neighbourhood's in the area that we've highlighted and you see a storm, chances are it's going to be severe. So those severe weather warnings are issued, also can be issued sort of every hour, half hour. We update them as needed, and we typically try to give, a bit of notice for those ones too. So if we can, we give a bit of lead time of sort of half an hour to an hour, but sometimes if they're not severe and then they turn severe, we issue those warnings quite quickly. So that's severe thunderstorm. I don't know if you wanted to comment on the flood warnings, Jeff?
Yeah, so I suppose unsurprisingly, the flood warnings are focused on the catchment areas. So we've got about 30 or 40 different catchments in Queensland, and those flood warnings are focused on where those catchment boundaries go to. So they're typically issued at, in some cases in Western Queensland where the water moves quite slowly, they can be issued every several days because the situation doesn't change very quickly. Whereas some places on the coast where the flooding can happen quite quickly, that may be, those flood warnings may be issued as frequently as every 3 hours, or in extreme cases maybe even every hour. So that's I suppose just underscores the the wide range of flooding that we do have in Queensland. We've got the very slow moving stuff out and typically some more rapid stuff on the coast.
Excellent. Okay. So we are running out of time, unfortunately. I did want to mention something. Mel was talking about some of the social medias or things to follow in order to get information about your local council. Emma jumped onto our chat and said our Region Watch page is where we try and send people to see where we're setting up evacuation centres, etc. So keep that in mind as well, the Region Watch page. And finally, I thought we might finish on an interesting question from Jay. So very quick, guys. Do you get excited in cyclone season? Jay works in breakfast radio, and as serious as they can be, I find the weather fascinating and exciting. Now, obviously, minimal to no damage is ideal, but in that situation, do you find that exciting? We'll get it from you, Laura.
That's a great question. Yes, and we do get trained here at the Bureau to, you can be excited, but we've got to remember the human impacts of these as well, because from a purely scientific perspective, they are fascinating.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, guys. We really appreciate all the hard work that you've put into getting this presentation together, but unfortunately we do have to bring it to an end there. So if you'd like to get more information from the Bureau on your favorite platform, why not connect with us on social media, our blog, or our excellent BOM weather app. And if you subscribe to receive updates direct to your inbox from the Bureau about everything Laura and Jess have talked about today, or information on upcoming webinars. Could we grab the next slide, please? And Jess, if you wouldn't mind giving us a quick summary on what we spoke about today, that'd be excellent.
Yeah, thanks, Jordan. Just before we run off, just I suppose some take-home messages for everyone. Cooler days, warmer nights, wetter than average. Expecting more widespread flooding and average to above average for tropical cyclones. So that's your take-home messages from the Bureau. And don't forget, from QRA's point of view, you've got your 3 steps to get ready. Step 1, have a plan. Step 2, supplies. And step 3, check your insurance. Thanks everyone for being here tonight too. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you very much. And as you can see on the next slide, there are all the different ways that you can get in contact with us if you would like to continue the conversation. Our next BOM webinar will focus on the wet season. So we've talked a little bit about this today, but we'll be providing an update to look at the monsoon onset, the current state of water resources across the north, and along with some severe weather outlooks as well. So put it in your diary now. It's the wet season outlook for 2021, and it'll be on the 18th of December. If you'd like to come along, then please click the registration link that is in your chat right now, so you can join us. And that brings us to the end of our webinar today. For any questions that we didn't get to, please email helpdesk.climate@bom.gov.au. I'll repeat that, helpdesk.climate@bom.gov.au. A big thank you to Jess, Melissa, and Laura. We appreciate your time in developing the content and sharing your knowledge with us. And to you, thank you for tuning in and joining with us today. We hope you've enjoyed the session, and we do hope you'll join us again next time. If you'd like to continue the conversation, please use the hashtag BOMWebinars in your social media posts. As mentioned earlier, this session has been recorded, and we will have the video to you real soon, so watch your inbox. Finally, but most importantly, we want your feedback. It's our aim to bring you the highest possible quality webinars, but we can't do that unless you share your experiences with us. So once we close this webinar, a short survey will pop up on your screen, and we would be very grateful if you could complete that anonymously for us. Once again, thank you for your time, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Goodbye.